Welcome to our new series, Leading SA, where I sit down with some of the leaders of San Antonio to talk about some of the issues that we face here, some of the ways to fix the problems, and the vision of the future of the Alamo City. Ana Sandoval, thanks so much joining Leading SA this week.
Thank you for having me.
Right off the bat, goals for 2020.
Sure. So most importantly, to continue serving my community. It's very important for me to keep my residents in District 7 informed about what I'm doing, what's happening at City Hall, but also to continue gauging their feedback. So I have ways in which I do that. But in terms of projects, we want to deliver on a lot of infrastructure projects that are very important to the District 7 residents. Chief among them is how safe they feel walking, whether or not they have sidewalks, how safe they feel walking down their street. In addition, we have some drainage issues that we're working on. That's more toward the core of downtown. And then my biggest infrastructure project that I'm working on, and I certainly don't work on it alone, there's a lot of team players, that has to do with planning a future for Bandera Road.
Infrastructure is a key topic that every city council person that we've talked to, they say that their constituents, their neighbors, some people only like to call them neighbors, they always bring up infrastructure. Has it come to this point as a breaking point of our infrastructure, or has it just been building up for so long we're now addressing it?
Sure. So I would say that it has been building up. We have an underinvestment in our infrastructure in multiple ways in the city of San Antonio. We've grown very vast, very broadly. We have annexed a lot of land over the years, and the truth is that's very expensive, maintaining those streets. We also drive a lot on them. So that certainly comes at a cost. A few years ago, what we invested in just maintaining those streets, not building new ones, just maintaining the streets was at $35 million for the whole city of San Antonio. Today, that number's at $110 million. So we've tripled, and that's good. We require that investment, but it's still, there is still a waiting list for things that we need to do. And that's just streets. That does not cover the drainage issues that we have. That doesn't cover all of the sidewalk needs that we have in San Antonio.
You specifically address Bandera Road. Anyone who has been on Bandera at a specific time in the day, it is a nightmare. Can't move, or you move 10 feet at a time. What are some of the ideas that you have?
Sure. Well, first of all, I hate hearing that a part of the area that I represent is a nightmare, but in truth, a lot of people don't like driving on it, but we have to. So let me tell you a little bit about Bandera Road and why it's so interesting. When you're on it, maybe you don't think about that. You just wish there was another lane, or that you could go faster, or that not so many people were turning left. But the truth is, this is one of the most congested roads in Texas, and even though it's not a freeway, it's a highway, it carries more traffic than a lot of roads in San Antonio. It carries about 60 to 70,000 vehicles a day. That's freeway level movement through there. So it's a very important corridor, not only for those of us who live and work on it, but for people who live outside of San Antonio and use that corridor to come into the city, that live out west. In addition, the way Bandera Road and the community along it was developed is, it wasn't like a grid, like you go downtown and for the most part, right? You have north, south, east, west. It wasn't quite like that. So what we see on Bandera is that some of that traffic is actually just trying to get across Bandera. So you have people in Alamo Ranch who are trying to go to the medical center because that's where we have a lot of jobs. They have to cross Bandera to get there, and there's no way you can just cross Bandera. You pretty much have to get on it, stay a while, turn left. So some of the things we're looking at is how can we move people across the corridor without having to have them, actually stay on Bandera. That's a lot of the traffic, is really just trying to get across it from north to south or south to north.
Now, we talked earlier about some of your resume, climate,
Right.
Climate Action Plan for San Antonio. What role have you played in that, and why do you think this is important for the Alamo City?
Sure. So like you mentioned, when I was in school, or on my resume, I did spend several years doing climate modeling and understanding how that works. And then I spent some time actually doing some of that work in California. So here in San Antonio, we committed to develop a plan, an action plan. And all of those measures that we proposed in that plan are things that give us additional benefits. So for instance, making San Antonio more walkable. It's what I hear from the residents all the time. Where are my sidewalks? I'd like to be able to walk to the park. That's one recommendation. Another one is, working on bringing in more solar power. People really like the idea of having clean energy. So my role was really working with some of the stakeholders and moving the plan along and ensuring that we had something that we could really implement.
Now, a lot of people are going to say, climate change, it's obviously a hot button issue, but some of those benefits, just cleaner air, less medical bills. What are the economic factors that are not so politically driven that you guys try to address?
Sure. So, for instance, one thing that was of great concern to many in the community was, is our electricity going to cost us more? And what we put into place was a kind of this is so wonky, but it's an evaluation tool. So for everything, whether it's electricity cost or any other measure that we're going to try to implement, we want to see how it's going to affect different members of our community economically and in terms of their health and other measures. What we don't want is for something that we think is going to be great to end up hurting some members of our community. So we want to implement everything in a way that is, going to help all of San Antonio move forward. So that's one of the economic factors. Another thing that we didn't really talk a lot about, but I think has huge potential, is the idea of green collar jobs resulting from a lot of these measures. So I'll give you an example. Right now, City Council is working on adopting a program called PACE. And it's property assessed clean energy. So if you own, let's say you own this building here, right? I know.
What a dream.
Yes. you own the whole studio, and you actually want to make some energy efficiency improvements on it. You want to make some water efficiency improvements on it. You know that's going to cost you money. You're like, geez, do I really have to do this now? What if I sell the building in the future? What PACE allows you to do is access a line of financing to help you make those improvements, but you only pay it off with the savings you have in energy or in water usage. So you don't really feel it. It's going to be net neutral for you. And the day you sell the building, that debt passes on to the next owner. So you are not out that money. So that is going to actually create more jobs for contractors, more jobs for engineers and designers, and also for energy auditors. In other words, the person who's going to come in and make sure that those improvements happened. So that's a lot more work that we can see here in San Antonio.
We have these buzzwords, carbon neutral, carbon negative. Do you have a set goal for San Antonio businesses in regards to that carbon emissions output?
What City Council adopted in that plan was to strive for carbon neutrality in 2050. So what does that mean? It means that we're not adding any more of these dangerous carbon emissions or carbon dioxide equivalent emissions to the air. But that could mean that maybe we still have some gasoline powered cars, but we have other ways of taking that carbon out of the air and being neutral.
I'm actually looking into a story, cost effectiveness of having an electric vehicle like a Tesla in San Antonio. From your perspective, is San Antonio a feasible place to have a purely electric vehicle?
I think any place that you have any kind of vehicle, you should consider having an electric vehicle and providing the infrastructure for that. I actually have someone in my office who a few years ago retired from her teaching job. She'd been a teacher for 45 years, and she purchased an electric vehicle. She said, this is going to be my forever car. She could not be happier with it. She likes to be the one who runs the errands or takes people places because she likes to say that she needs gas money or, money for her oil change or something like that. And I mean, that's just something she never has to do, right? Is change the oil or load up on gas.
Is the infrastructure in place in San Antonio?
No, it's not. I mean, we certainly do have some charging locations, but we would need to see some more if all the vehicles in San Antonio were to become electric. But I think that's certainly something that we can invest in as a city, is having some of that infrastructure. And it doesn't all need to be provided by the city. I mean, that's also an investment, right? That's also got value and can create some economic stimulation in our community.
Going to current events, we actually just met with Molly Cox of SA 2020.
Okay.
We went through all the results. One of the things that jumped out to me, the obesity rates in San Antonio. Terrible over the last decade, and they've only gotten worse, further away from the goal. You are one of the chairs of the health and the equity of San Antonio. What initiatives are being done, and what should people take away from these numbers?
It's, one of the first things I did as chair of that committee was have Molly Cox come and give us this presentation. This was just a few years ago. And the truth is, the numbers are sobering. When we adopted SA 2020, the community, or at least those people who participated in it, had such enthusiasm, right, to say, this is what I want to see in the future, and we're making it happen. And the truth is, some of us dropped the ball on those initiatives and didn't take ownership of them. In terms of what the city is doing with regards to obesity, a number of initiatives, but we are just one organization of many. I think one of the most critical things that we should be working on is ensuring that there is access to healthy food in all parts of the city. And by access, I mean that you can get there and that you can afford it. We do have something called a corner store initiative, a neighborhood corner store initiative, but it's in a pilot phase right now. We need to move beyond that pilot phase so that no matter where you live, you have access to not just the grocery store, but also if you want to eat out, that you have those healthy options too.
Okay, now obviously obesity leads to later problems in life. Health-wise, for the people of San Antonio, what does your perspective look like? When you look around and you see San Antonio on some of these lists, like one of the least healthy cities in Texas and the country, what kind of goes through your mind?
Yet another set of sobering statistics, right? When we look at the health outcomes in San Antonio. So one of the things that does come to mind is, all right, who are the partners that we need to work with, and who's really going to take a leadership role in making this happen? I think, when I was running for office, for me personally, because I have a background in public health, that was something that was very important to me. As I saw San Antonio, the health outcomes that were so concerning, we needed a champion to work on those. And then once on council, you realize there's a million other emergencies that you need to deal with. But I worry about our population, but I also think, okay, what are the tools that we have that can help? And I will tell you that I supported the paid sick leave initiative, what's called the Safe and Sick Leave Ordinance. And I believe that if people have access to preventative care, they are more likely, and the numbers show this, right? They are more likely to take care of themselves and have a healthier outcomes in the future. So making sure that people don't have to choose between going to the doctor and paying their rent or paying for their other bills. Another thing that's very important when it comes to health outcomes, and this is more of a generational thing, it's not going to happen overnight, is education. The more educated people are, the better they take care of themselves, right? Because they learn how to discipline themselves, but also they have access and are interested in information that's going to help them take care of themselves. So when I walked in, you talked to me a little bit about pre-K 4SA, and that is probably the foundation of making sure that all residents in San Antonio end up with a great education that allows them to take care of themselves, their health, that allows them to find employment, to take care of themselves and their family.
Okay, look at that. Perfect transition right to pre-KSA. Obviously, in one of the current events, another big current event, coronavirus. JBSA, there's obviously, people are scared, neighbors don't know what to expect, and then you have people of government, local, federal, coming out against it. What's your perspective?
Sure, this is one of those tremendously unfortunate things that because of how interconnected our world is, all of a sudden you can see something spread really quickly. The truth of the matter is, and I'd be remiss if I didn't mention this, is that the flu is a much greater risk to people. So always get your flu vaccination. I know it's not 100% proof, but always get your flu vaccination. Always wash your hands, be extremely careful, and don't sneeze into your hands and don't cough into your hands. You've always got to do it into your arm or in a tissue, so I have to use the opportunity to say that. But in terms of the coronavirus, I think we're very lucky in San Antonio that even though we do have individuals who have the coronavirus, we have the participation of the Centers for Disease Control, the Texas Health Department, and the military, along with our experts in the city of San Antonio. And the public is at very, very low risk here. Every precaution is being taken so that those individuals get the care that they need and so that the virus doesn't spread.
Now, you were part of the Governmental Relations Committee, correct?
Correct.
Did you guys have a direct line to anyone at JBSA or the CDC give you kind of a forewarning, or was it just kind of sprung on you?
So this particular issue was dealt directly with the mayor's office as the representative of the council. We have excellent relationships and contacts in the military. As you know, we have a whole department dedicated to military affairs, and we are Military City USA. Our health department also has an excellent line of communication with the health department and with the CDC.
Staying with current events, talk about ballots. Connect SA. That is going to be a big topic of discussion, especially when it comes to that 1/8 cent sales tax. What is your take on Connect SA, and how vital could that be for the future growth of our city?
Sure. So my first job was at VIA at the bus company. So I worked there 2 years at a time when we were also seeking additional funding from the ballot. And from my time there, what I learned is that unlike Austin, unlike Dallas, unlike Houston, San Antonio has significantly underinvested in its public transportation system. In terms of what we give that transportation system, it's half a penny on the dollar. You know, when you go buy something, that's what's getting to VIA. And that's the money that VIA uses to actually run those buses. So in other cities, not only do they have twice that, they have the full penny, but they also have a much bigger tax base, right? They have bigger economies. So we have to think about not only how does VIA catch up, but how do we give our community the same access, the same amenities that is had in other parts of the state to develop their own economies? Public transportation isn't just a bus running. It's really about getting you to a job, connecting you to, if you wanted to take night classes, and making sure your children have those opportunities too. So I think it's absolutely critical that we grow our public transportation system. We are the poorest large city in America. Public transportation is a way out of poverty because it connects you to opportunity.
The mayor called it the era of mobility. My question is, if you had someone on here and say, look, I don't really use the bus much. Why should my money be going to the expansion of these projects if that doesn't really affect me?
Excuse me, having some water here.
It's okay.
No, absolutely. My take is, you know, we started the interview off talking about infrastructure and how important it was, and why, because it connects us. So I see public transportation as simply a piece of that infrastructure. You know, we have roads for cars, hopefully we'll have more sidewalks for pedestrians, but having the bus is a critical piece of that infrastructure.
I'm going to throw it back to last year, actually the last few years. There has been some interesting words on the city council saying that a lot of things were done behind closed doors. What do you guys plan to do moving forward to make sure that you are as transparent as possible when it comes to those big decisions?
Sure. So in 2018, I proposed a policy change, and I called it Adopting Public Participation Principles. And fortunately, the council adopted that. And what it's really about is for us as a city, the employees and us as a council, to take a step back and say, when we make big decisions, we invite the public to give us their input, because it's going to make our decisions better if we can consider what's important to our residents. So the council adopted this. Other things that we did because of this advocacy was, you can see city council meetings online, right? I'm sure you watch them all day long, and but what you wouldn't see was the committee meetings online. So a lot of decisions are actually made before, or things are set up before they get to council, where you have the final decision. But a lot of the discussion is had at a committee meeting, or at a zoning meeting, or at what we call Board of Adjustment, Historic Design Review Committee. That's where a lot of the discussion takes place. So it was important to me that the public also have access to those meetings. Now, you can go there, you can clock out of work in the middle of the day, go sit in that meeting, but that's not realistic. So now all of those meetings are live streamed and available for viewing afterwards. So this is one way that we can make sure that the public is informed.
Okay. Last question. It's kind of going to be a series of questions, a cluster of questions.
Okay, so it's not the last question.
It's the last series of questions.
Sure.
We are growing at a rapid pace, expecting more than 1 million people in the next 20 years. What does that mean for the city and specifically your district?
So number one, if we go back to infrastructure, it means more congestion if everyone is going to be moving around the way they do today. That's why it's critically important for us to continue investing in sidewalks, micromobility, so that if people want to ride a bicycle, they're safe doing so, and of course, the public transportation system. And it needs to be viable, right? So that people are able to leave their cars at home. It needs to be reliable. So on the one hand, that's what it means. On the other hand, I think we are going to continue seeing our housing crunch that we have right now, and we need to continue being smart about how to keep housing affordable, especially for the residents that have been here their whole lives, whose families have been here for generations. They're really, I would say, kind of the fabric of the city, what gives the city its flavor. And so I would say probably the third thing is, how do we become this great city with all these people and not lose who we are at our roots, not lose the character of San Antonio?
That seems like such a broad overviewing question, because it is that happiness of bringing in this new economy and all these new people and these new businesses at the same time keeping the culture alive. How do you guys as a council, and you individually, how do you plan to address this question?
Well, there's a lot of ceremonial things, right, that council does, that council acknowledges, but we really need to make that part of the standing fabric of the city. So one thing that the council did through its Arts Commission, so this is a group of volunteers that advise the city council when it comes to arts funding and what we do in arts. One thing that they did a few years ago was ensure that funding was set aside for not just for art, but for art that may have a certain cultural significance, all art has cultural significance, right? But that may represent a minority population. So a few decades ago, we had dozens of organizations that worked in Mexican American art, Chicano art. Today, that number has significantly dwindled. So we want to make sure that those organizations continue to have an opportunity and are competitive for funding. So that is one small way that we can do that.
What about keeping the people here?
Keeping the people here. So, we have this debate frequently at council, and it peers its head in different ways. But when we talk about how we change the way we use our land and zoning cases, that has a tremendous impact on the character of a neighborhood and what stays alive there. So we don't simply, some zoning cases can go by easily, but a lot of them really take negotiation with the folks who live there, folks who've lived there for a long time, and the people who are building something new. And my position in my district is that anyone who is coming in to build a new project has to communicate with the neighbors in that area, because while we do want great new things, we also want good neighbors. So that's one of the most important things in my area.
Last question, the definitive last question. What is your goal for the next 20 years for San Antonio?
I want our city to become sustainable in many ways. Number one, I want our jobs to be sustainable, right? For us to be able to employ all the wonderful people who live in San Antonio and who've grown up here, to have opportunities and great jobs and great lives here. And of course, I want us to make sure that our natural environment is as beautiful in 20 years from now as it is today.
Perfect. Ana Sandoval,
thank you
so much.
Throughout Leading SA, we'll hear from plenty of other local leaders, but we also want to hear from you. Head to KSAT.com right now, search Leading SA, tell us what problems you're passionate about in your community, and we can ask your questions.